I closed the front door and pretended to leave for the airport. Standing in the cold shadows of the garage, I opened the security app on my phone to check the baby monitor one last time. I did not expect to hear my husband pouring wine. I certainly did not expect to hear my own mother and sister sitting in my living room casually discussing the exact date they planned to lock me in a psychiatric ward and steal my son. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever discovered a devastating betrayal and decided to burn their kingdom to the ground instead of crying. My name is Claire, and at 34 years old, I learned that the people who smile at you the brightest are often the ones holding the sharpest knives. I was supposed to be in a taxi heading to the airport for a business trip to Chicago. My husband Hudson had just kissed my cheek. He gave me that perfectly practiced, charming smile, the one that made him a top-tier wealth manager at his firm, and told me to rest on the plane. He told me he loved me, and that he would take perfect care of our 1-year-old son Leo while I was gone. I closed the heavy oak door of our suburban home, my heart pounding with an exhaustion I could not explain. For months I had been feeling like a stranger in my own home. I was constantly drained, second-guessing my memories and questioning my own sanity. Hudson and my mother, Catherine, kept telling me I was becoming unstable. They suggested I was suffering from severe postpartum depression. They recommended doctors handed me pills and watched me with expressions of deep pity. I had packed my suitcase just wanting a single night of silence at a local hotel to catch up on sleep and escape the suffocating anxiety. I had booked a cheap room under a fake name just to breathe without my husband hovering over me with another glass of heavily doctored tea. I slipped through the side gate and stepped into the detached garage to wait for my ride. I opened my phone and tapped the baby monitor app. I just wanted to see Leo sleep one last time. Instead of the nursery, the app connected to the hidden camera in the living room bookshelf. Hudson had insisted we install it for security reasons. The screen flickered to life. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the fireplace. Hudson was not upstairs with our son. He was standing by the bar cart pouring 2 generous glasses of expensive Merlot. Sitting on our cream-colored sofa was my mother Catherine and my younger sister Stella. They were not talking about the weather. They were not sharing family gossip. Their expressions were filled with predatory triumph. I turned up the volume on my phone. Hudson spoke first. His voice lacked any of the warmth he had shown me minutes earlier. It was cold and sharp. "I cannot stand playing house with that boring drone for another minute," Hudson said. He handed a glass to Stella. His fingers brushed against hers and lingered there. Stella looked up at him with a smile that made my stomach churn. Hudson turned to my mother and pointed toward the ceiling. "When are we pulling the trigger on full custody?" The question felt like a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. My husband, the man I trusted to protect our child, was plotting to take my son from me. My mother took a slow sip of her wine. Her diamond rings glinted under the chandelier light. She looked perfectly composed. She was the matriarch who had spent my entire life making me feel inadequate because I was not as glamorous or social as Stella. "Patience, Hudson," my mother said. Her voice was smooth and calculating. "The medical records are secured. Dr. Vance took the bribe. He has falsified Claire's files to look like severe psychosis." I stared at the screen in absolute horror. The doctor's visits, the pills Hudson insisted I take, the constant gaslighting about my memory. It was all a deliberate, calculated setup. They were documenting a fake mental breakdown to build an airtight legal case against me. Every time I told Hudson I felt dizzy or confused, he had been slipping something into my drinks. Every time my mother called to ask how I was coping, she was gathering ammunition for my committal. They were building a paper trail of madness, step by calculated step. My mother continued speaking, completely devoid of any maternal instinct. "The moment those offshore shares clear into her name, we freeze the accounts. We have her committed for her own safety, and we assume legal guardianship over her and the boy." Stella giggled. The sound was high and cruel. I cannot wait to see the look on her plain, pathetic face when the men in white coats take her away. She has always thought she was so much smarter than us, just because she is a forensic accountant. I did not scream. I did not drop my phone. The icy terror that had injected itself into my veins immediately morphed into a razor-sharp clarity. Stella was right about one thing. I was a forensic accountant. My entire career was built on dismantling corporate fraud, tracing hidden assets, and exposing the smartest criminals in the financial world. My husband and my own mother were conspiring to throw me into a psychiatric ward to steal my life. And they were foolish enough to leave a digital trail. I silently closed the app. I picked up my suitcase and walked out of the garage toward the street. The tears never came. I had work to do. I knew exactly who Hudson was now, and I knew my family was capable of destroying me for money. The game had changed, and I was going to be the one to deal the final hand. The hotel room I checked into was small and smelled of industrial cleaner. It was a far cry from the life of luxury I had been carefully maintaining for a family that secretly despised me. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and opened my encrypted work laptop. As the screen lit up my face, the reality of my family's betrayal settled over me. It really should not have been a surprise. Growing up, Stella was the golden child. She was the pageant queen, the socialite, the flawless reflection of my parents' vanity. I was the quiet, analytical scapegoat. When I was 18, my parents drained my college savings to fund Stella's lifestyle brand that failed in 6 months. They told me I would have to figure out my own path because Stella needed the investment. I put myself through university with scholarships and 3 jobs. I became the successful and stable one. But in their eyes, I was just a walking bank account. When I married Hudson, my parents finally approved of me. Now I knew why. Hudson was a shark just like them. I typed in my passwords and bypassed the basic firewalls on Hudson's personal home server. If Hudson thought he could manipulate my accounts, he had drastically underestimated my skills. I moved through his digital files with the precision of a surgeon. The deeper I dug into the encrypted folders, the more horrifying the reality became. What I found within the first 2 hours was not just infidelity or a simple plot to steal my personal savings. It was a massive financial crime that spanned multiple states and offshore tax havens. Hudson was not just managing wealth for his elite clients. He was running a shadow ledger that would put him behind bars for decades. He had been quietly siphoning millions of dollars from his firm's wealthiest investors and funneling the cash into dummy corporations. I traced the wire transfers across shell accounts in the Cayman Islands and Delaware. My heart beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I uncovered the true extent of his arrogance. But the absolute horror lay in the routing details. The destination accounts were not in Hudson's name, they were in mine. He was laundering stolen money through shell companies tied directly to my social security number and my professional credentials. If the authorities caught wind of this, Hudson would walk away as the concerned, devastated husband of a mentally unstable financial criminal. I would be locked in a federal prison or a psychiatric ward, while he and my family lived lavishly off the stolen millions. It was a flawless frame-up, designed to strip me of my child, my reputation, and my freedom in one devastating sweep. I looked at the digital files, seeing my own name attached to millions of dollars in illegal transactions. The level of detail was staggering. They had created fraudulent email accounts mimicking my communication style. They had drafted fake investment strategies bearing my digital signature. They had been planning this for years, waiting for the right moment, and they had almost succeeded. A cold anger replaced my fear. They wanted me to be the failure, the scapegoat, the boring drone. But they were about to realize that the drone had been tracking their every move. I needed to move fast, but I needed to be incredibly smart. If I went to the police right now, Hudson might get tipped off and destroy the evidence on his end. I needed someone inside the justice system. I needed someone who was also a victim of their cruelty and would not hesitate to help me burn their false kingdom to the ground. I thought of Jamal. He was an assistant district attorney and my sister Stella's husband. My parents loathed him. Despite his brilliant legal mind and impeccable integrity, they constantly made passive-aggressive comments about his African-American heritage. They treated him as a temporary accessory to Stella's glamorous life, because he did not come from old money, and his skin color did not match their country club aesthetic. Jamal had always been kind to me. We shared the silent bond of being the outsiders at the family dinner table. We were the ones who were never quite good enough for Catherine and William. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It was 2 in the morning. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Jamal, I need to see you," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "Tomorrow morning, alone. It is a matter of life and death." I did not wait for his response. I ended the call. I laid out the financial documents on the bed, my mind racing through strategies and legal loopholes. I had the evidence, the motive, and the opportunity. I just needed the right moment to strike. I was not scared anymore. I was ready for war. The diner neon sign flickered against the gray morning sky. It was a rundown place on the outskirts of the city, far away from the gated communities my family frequented. I sat in a cracked vinyl booth with my laptop bag pressed against my legs. I ordered black coffee and watched the entrance. At exactly 6, Jamal walked in. He was a tall African-American man who usually carried himself with the sharp confidence of a seasoned prosecutor. Today his suit was wrinkled, his tie was missing, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He spotted me and slid into the booth across the table. He did not even bother to order anything from the waitress standing nearby. He stared at me with absolute devastation. I reached for my laptop bag to show him the offshore routing numbers. I needed to explain how Hudson and my mother were planning to steal my son and frame me. "I have the evidence, Jamal," I whispered. "Hudson is laundering money through shell companies. My parents are helping him commit me to a psychiatric facility. I need your help to file federal charges before they freeze my assets today." Jamal did not look surprised. He did not ask to see my screen. Instead, he pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it carefully on the sticky table between us. "You did not go to Chicago, Claire," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "And I know exactly why you are hiding in a hotel." "What is this?" I asked. "Open the envelope right now," he commanded softly. I slid the contents onto the table. They were dozens of high-resolution photographs with the unmistakable timestamp of a private investigator. I stared at the top photo. It was Hudson. He was confidently walking into a luxury downtown hotel. The woman holding his hand, leaning her head against his shoulder with familiar intimacy, was my sister Stella. I flipped to the next photo. They were kissing in an underground parking garage. The next photograph showed Hudson tenderly kissing the inside of her wrist at a high-end restaurant. The dates stretched back months. Some were taken on days Hudson claimed he had late client dinners. Some were taken on days Stella claimed she was at the spa. My stomach plummeted, but I forced myself to keep looking. I had spent years analyzing fraudulent data and knew how to detach my emotions from the evidence. But the final piece of paper nearly broke me. It was an official laboratory report, an official DNA paternity test. I looked up at Jamal. He was staring out the window, his jaw clenched. "Stella's youngest son, Jamal," said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The 2-year-old boy I have been raising is not mine. He is Hudson's. They have been sleeping together for 3 years. A double betrayal so profound it defied logic. My husband and my sister. They were not just conspiring to steal my money and my sanity. They had been parading their affair while playing perfect family members. Hudson had fathered a child with my sister while telling me I was too unstable to have a second baby. I have been building a case for a divorce," Jamal continued, turning his gaze back to me. His eyes were cold and sharp. "I hired the private investigator 3 weeks ago because I found a burner phone in Stella's car, but then I started noticing anomalies in her personal bank accounts. Massive influxes of cash. Hundreds of thousands of dollars appearing from nowhere, routed through holding companies I had never heard of. I could not trace the source without triggering a red flag at her bank." I turned my laptop around to face him. I opened the master ledger I had pulled from Hudson's server. "I can trace the source," I said. My voice did not shake. The tears that should have blinded me were replaced by a cold, calculating rage. "Your wife and my husband are laundering stolen money. Hudson is embezzling millions from his wealthiest clients. He is dumping the cash into shell corporations tied to my social security number to frame me. But the profit they are keeping for themselves is being funneled directly to Stella. Jamal leaned forward, his eyes scanning the digital ledger. He understood the numbers immediately. He saw the fake invoices, the offshore holding companies, and the dummy corporations. He saw the exact amounts matching the deposits in Stella's accounts. And my parents know about this, I added. I played the audio recording from the baby monitor. I watched Jamal's face as he listened to my mother coldly discuss bribing a doctor to falsify my psychiatric records, and Stella gleefully anticipating my institutionalization. They are going to lock you up, Jamal stated factually. They are going to declare you unfit, let Hudson take full custody of Leo, and then use your identity to take the fall when the federal authorities realize the client's money is missing. Yes, I said quietly. And while I am locked in a padded room, Hudson will divorce me, take my son, and play the tragic single father. Eventually, he and Stella will find an excuse to leave you, Jamal. They will merge their stolen wealth, raise their biological son together, and my parents will applaud them for securing the family legacy. We sat in that diner for 4 hours. We were two discarded outsiders, the people William and Catherine had always considered inferior, mapping out the absolute destruction of the people who thought we were fools. Jamal knew criminal law. He knew the exact thresholds required for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission to move in without warning. I knew every intricate detail of corporate forensic accounting. I knew how to follow the digital breadcrumbs, untangle the shell companies, and freeze the assets before they could be moved offshore. We forged a pact right there over cold coffee. There would be no tears. There would be no premature confrontations. We would not ever scream at them or demand any explanations. We would play our roles perfectly until the cage was fully built around them, trapping them forever. Jamal slid out of the diner booth and walked to his car without looking back. We had our assignments. I stayed behind for a few minutes, staring into the dregs of my cold coffee. The plan required me to return to my house tonight, dragging my suitcase and pretending my business trip had been canceled due to a sudden panic attack. I had to look like the fragile, mentally deteriorating woman they were paying a corrupt doctor to document. I had to smile at my husband knowing he was sleeping with my sister. I had to let him hold me knowing he was planning to steal my son. To pull off a performance that convincing, I needed to channel every ounce of resentment I had buried over the last 34 years. I drove back to my cheap hotel room to prepare my disguise. I stood in front of the scratched bathroom mirror and wiped away my makeup. I ran my fingers roughly through my hair to make it look unkempt and neglected. I practiced letting my shoulders slump, erasing the confident posture of a senior forensic accountant and replacing it with the exhausted slouch of a woman losing her grip on reality. As I stared at my tired eyes in the mirror, the memories I had tried so hard to suppress came flooding back. The contrast between my life and Stella's was not just a matter of sibling rivalry. It was a systematic psychological conditioning orchestrated by my parents. Catherine and William had decided early on that Stella was their masterpiece. She was loud, demanding, and inherently manipulative, traits my parents mistakenly labeled as leadership and charm. I was quiet, observant, and cautious. They labeled me as difficult, antisocial, and a massive disappointment. I remembered the year I turned 18. I had worked tirelessly throughout high school, earning straight grades and securing admission to a top-tier university. I had saved every dollar from my part-time jobs, combining it with the college fund my grandparents had established for me. It was my ticket out of their toxic household. 2 weeks before tuition was due, I logged into the account and found it completely empty. When I confronted my parents in the living room, Catherine did not even look guilty. She calmly informed me that Stella needed the money to launch a lifestyle and beauty brand. Stella was 20 at the time, obsessed with becoming a wealthy influencer. My father, William, backed my mother up immediately. He told me that Stella had real star power and needed capital to secure her future. He said I was smart enough to figure out my own path and that I should be grateful to support my sister. Stella's business venture collapsed in less than 6 months. She spent my entire college fund on designer clothes, luxury vacations, and lavish parties to impress her superficial friends. Not a single dollar was ever paid back to me. When I cried about losing my university placement, my mother slapped me across the face and called me a selfish, jealous brat. I was forced to take out massive student loans and work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over my head. I built my career from nothing. I became an expert in tracing hidden assets because I knew exactly what it felt like to have everything stolen from me by the people I trusted most. That was the dynamic. Stella was the predator encouraged and funded by my parents. I was the prey expected to lie down and sacrifice myself for their comfort. Now, sitting on the hotel bed, I realized they were simply running the exact same play on a much grander scale. They were not just taking a college fund this time. They were taking my life savings, my professional license, my freedom, and my child. And they had found the perfect weapon to execute their plan. Hudson. Hudson was the male version of Stella. He possessed the same hollow charm, the same ruthless greed, and the same absolute lack of empathy. When Hudson and I first started dating, Catherine and William treated him like royalty. They fawned over his expensive suits, his sports cars, and his prestigious title as a wealth manager. For the first time in my life, my parents approved of my choices. They invited us to Sunday dinners. They bragged about Hudson to their country club friends. I foolishly thought I had finally earned their respect. The truth was entirely different. They did not respect me. They recognized a fellow predator in Hudson. They saw a man who operated with the same toxic rulebook they did. It made perfect sense that Hudson and Stella would inevitably gravitate toward each other. They were two parasites drawn to the same source of wealth. They had been sleeping together for 3 years right under my nose, and my parents had likely known about it for most of that time. They probably viewed the affair as a convenient way to keep Hudson's stolen millions within the immediate family. I grabbed my suitcase and walked out of the hotel room. I drove my rental car back toward my neighborhood, rehearsing my lines for the performance of a lifetime. I needed to look utterly broken. Hudson needed to believe his gaslighting was working perfectly. He needed to see a woman on the verge of a total psychological collapse. If I showed even a fraction of the cold, calculated fury boiling inside my chest, he would panic and try to destroy the evidence. I pulled into my driveway just as the sun began to set. The house looked beautiful and inviting, a perfect suburban illusion, hiding a nest of vipers. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I thought of my 1-year-old son Leo sleeping inside. He was the only innocent person in that house. I was going to secure his future by burning his father's life to ash. I stepped out of the car, dragging my suitcase across the pavement. I let my shoulders drop. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I walked up to the front door, inserted my key, and turned the lock. The final act was about to begin. I pushed the heavy front door open and let my suitcase drop to the hardwood floor with a loud thud. Hudson appeared at the top of the stairs almost instantly. He wore his expensive cashmere sweatpants and a look of perfectly manufactured alarm. I forced my hands to shake violently as I looked up at him, letting my breathing turn shallow and erratic. "Claire." He rushed down the steps, wrapping his arms around me in a tight embrace. "What happened? You look absolutely terrible." I leaned into his chest, stifling the intense urge to recoil from his familiar cologne. "I could not get on the plane, Hudson," I whispered, letting my voice crack flawlessly. The walls started closing in at the terminal. I could not breathe at all. "I think I am truly losing my mind." "Shh, it is okay," he murmured, stroking my hair with feigned tenderness. "You are just overworked. You are utterly exhausted. I told you last week that you were pushing yourself way too hard." He led me to the living room couch, the exact spot where he and Stella had been sitting and plotting my institutionalization just hours prior. He covered me with a heavy wool blanket and disappeared into the kitchen. When he returned, he held a steaming mug of chamomile tea. I knew exactly what was hidden in it. "Drink this," he urged, softly pressing the warm ceramic into my palms. "Dr. Vance said this mild sedative would help calm you down during these severe episodes." I took the mug with trembling fingers. I brought it to my lips, pretending to take a long, deep swallow, but I let the hot liquid pool entirely in my cheeks. The moment he turned around to check a notification on his phone, I spat the tainted tea into the large potted fern next to the sofa. I repeated this charade 3 times over the next 10 minutes until the mug was nearly empty. I just need to lie down, I murmured, letting my eyelids droop dramatically. Hudson practically carried me up the stairs and tucked me into our bed. He kissed my forehead, turned off the bedside lamp, and softly closed the door. I lay perfectly still in the pitch-black room, tightly regulating my breathing. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall toward the guest room where he claimed he was sleeping, so I could get uninterrupted rest. The truth was, he was likely texting Stella to update her on my supposed mental decline. I waited 2 agonizing hours. When the house was entirely silent and the only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerator, I slipped out of bed. I did not turn on any lights. I navigated the hallway entirely by memory, creeping past Leo's nursery where my son was sleeping peacefully. I reached Hudson's home office at the far end of the hall. He kept it strictly locked at all times, but a forensic accountant married to a white-collar criminal knows exactly how to bypass a standard deadbolt. A simple tension wrench and a lockpick slid the tumblers into place with a quiet, satisfying click. I stepped inside, closed the door securely behind me, and booted up my encrypted work laptop. I connected a specialized data extraction cable directly to Hudson's primary desktop hard drive. He thought his biometric passwords and encrypted folders were completely impenetrable. He forgot he married a woman who audited multinational corporations for a living. I ran a brute force decryption protocol Jamal and I had prepared earlier that afternoon. Within 12 minutes, I completely bypassed the firewall and gained unrestricted access to the absolute core of Hudson's financial network. The screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I began following the money trail. Forensic accounting is not just looking at simple spreadsheets, it is actively tracking the blood flow of a massive crime. Hudson had deliberately targeted 5 of his firm's oldest, most reclusive clients. These were individuals with massive offshore portfolios who rarely checked their quarterly statements. He was skimming fractional percentages at first, but over the past year, he had grown incredibly greedy. The minor skims turned into massive, unauthorized withdrawals disguised perfectly as high-yield offshore investments. I traced the first major withdrawal. $2 million was moved from an elderly client's trust into a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. From there, the money fragmented rapidly. It fractured into dozens of smaller wire transfers, washing through various international banks in Switzerland and Cyprus to obscure its origin. This is the layering phase of money laundering meticulously designed to confuse standard auditors. But I was not a standard auditor. I wrote custom algorithms to match the fragmented deposits based on timestamp proximity and specific currency conversion rates. The fragmented money recombined seamlessly in 3 domestic LLCs. I pulled the official incorporation documents for those specific companies. My stomach tightened painfully as I saw my own name listed as the sole proprietor and chief executive. He had blatantly used my social security number, forged my digital signature flawlessly, and attached my professional accounting license to legitimize these fake businesses. He had even created a fake email domain that perfectly mirrored my actual work address. Every piece of correspondence authorizing the movement of these stolen funds appeared to come directly from me. I took a deep breath and kept digging deeper into the server. I needed to see exactly where the clean money ended up. I tracked the outbound wires from the LLCs standing in my name. The laundered funds were funneled directly into a domestic corporate account registered under the name Apex Pinnacle Ventures. I ran a rapid public records search on Apex Pinnacle Ventures. The official ownership documents loaded on my screen. The company was jointly owned by Hudson and Stella. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. They were using my identity as a human shield to steal millions, leaving me to face decades of federal prison time, while they used the laundered cash to fund a luxury real estate development firm together. They were building their extravagant dream life entirely on my absolute destruction. But Hudson had made one fatal arrogant mistake. He got sloppy with his personal device syncing. His desktop was permanently linked to his cloud storage, which automatically backed up his personal text messages and emails. I ran a targeted keyword search for Dr. Vance, the corrupt psychiatrist my mother had bribed. A lengthy chain of emails populated the screen. Hudson and my mother were actively communicating with the doctor. My mother had wired Dr. Vance $50,000 from an untraceable offshore account. In exchange, Dr. Vance had submitted entirely falsified medical evaluations to the state health board, claiming I was experiencing violent psychotic breaks and was an active danger to my child. The final email from Hudson to the doctor was dated yesterday. It requested the emergency committal paperwork be finalized by next Friday. They were coming to lock me away in exactly 6 days. I moved swiftly. I downloaded every single file ledger, forged signature, and corrupt email onto 2 separate encrypted flash drives. I compiled the transaction hashes, the offshore account routing numbers, and the LLC registration certificates. This was the exact explosive evidence Jamal needed to secure federal warrants without tipping off the local police, who might easily be influenced by my family's wealth and status. By 4 in the morning, I had successfully cloned the entire shadow ledger. I meticulously wiped my digital footprints from Hudson's server, ensuring he would never know I had breached his system. I locked the office door and crept back into my bedroom. I slid under the covers, just as the first pale light of dawn began to creep through the blinds. My heart was pounding, but my mind was remarkably clear. I had the weapon to destroy them all. Now I just needed to play the fool a little longer. The morning sun felt like an interrogator spotlight as it hit my face. Hudson was sitting on the edge of the bed, perfectly dressed in his tailored navy suit. He held a glass of water and 2 white pills in his palm. His face was twisted into a mask of deep, agonizing concern. "Claire, sweetheart, you were tossing and turning all night," he whispered, his voice smooth and hypnotic. "You need to take your medication. Dr. Vance said it is absolutely critical you do not skip a dose." I stared at the white pills. I knew exactly what they were. They were heavy sedatives meant to keep me docile, confused, and unable to articulate a coherent sentence to anyone who might ask questions. I took the pills and the water. I placed the medication on my tongue and took a large gulp, immediately pushing the pills deep into my cheek. I swallowed loudly. Hudson smiled, kissed my forehead, and told me he had to get to the office early to handle a sudden client emergency. The moment I heard his sports car pull out of the driveway, I ran to the bathroom and spit the dissolving pills into the sink. I washed them down the drain and splashed freezing water on my face. The digital evidence I had stolen from his server last night was damning, but it did not explain the sudden rush. Why commit me next Friday? Money laundering schemes usually take years to unravel. Hudson was a meticulous criminal. Rushing a psychiatric committal was incredibly risky. Something else was forcing his hand. I needed to find the physical tether that tied their entire timeline together. I systematically searched every inch of our home that Hudson considered his private domain. I checked his gym bags, his humidor, and the hollow space behind his shoe rack. Nothing. Then I remembered the vintage leather briefcase he kept on the top shelf of his closet, a gift from my father on our wedding day. Hudson claimed he kept sensitive client files in it and had explicitly warned me never to open it. I pulled the heavy briefcase down. It had a classic dual combination lock. Hudson was an arrogant man who operated on pure predictability. I spun the dials to Stella's birthday. The lock snapped open instantly. The contents of that briefcase revealed the ultimate frame up a plot so perfectly evil it left me gasping for air in my own closet. Inside was a stack of physical documents meticulously engineered to be discovered by the authorities after I was gone. The first was a handwritten ledger. It was a physical record of the offshore accounts and the fake LLCs, complete with margin notes and paranoid calculations. The handwriting was identical to mine. Hudson had somehow hired a master forger or spent countless hours replicating my exact penmanship. He had even used the specific brand of blue ink I favored for my accounting audits. He had created a physical diary of a financial crime, placing me firmly as the criminal mastermind. Beneath the forged ledger was a single sheet of thick stationery. My heart stopped beating as I read the terrifying words. It was a confession letter, also written in my perfectly forged handwriting. The letter detailed the immense stress of motherhood, a fabricated spiral into severe postpartum psychosis, and an admission that I had embezzled millions of dollars to cope with my perceived inadequacies. It ended with an apology to Hudson and Leo for ruining their lives, stating that I could no longer live with the guilt of my massive crimes. It was not just a confession. It was a suicide note. The psychiatric committal next Friday was not their primary plan. It was their backup plan. Hudson and my mother were not just going to lock me away. If I fought back, or if the committal raised too many legal challenges, they were going to stage my suicide. They were going to murder me, leave this forged confession next to my body, and walk away as wealthy, tragic victims. I stared at the forged suicide note, realizing the full scope of my family's depravity. My mother had always looked at me with disappointment, but I never imagined she could look at me and see a disposable asset. She had carried me for 9 months, raised me under her roof, and was now actively participating in a plot that would end with my body zipped in a bag at the county morgue. The betrayal was so absolute it transcended anger. It became a pure crystalline focus. I was going to dismantle their entire existence. I dropped the letter back into the briefcase, my hands shaking so violently I had to press them against my knees. I dug deeper into the leather compartment and pulled out a thick manila folder bearing the logo of my parents' primary banking institution. I opened the file and stared at the official financial statements belonging to Catherine and William. This was the final, devastating layer of their betrayal. My parents were not just covering for Hudson because they liked him or because they wanted Stella to be happy. They were completely financially entangled in his criminal enterprise. The documents showed that my parents had quietly remortgaged their sprawling suburban estate and liquidated their entire retirement portfolio. They had taken every single dollar of their clean generational wealth and invested it directly into the dummy corporations Hudson had set up in my name. They were using my impending downfall to multiply their own wealth. Hudson was paying them a staggering 30% return on their investment, using the stolen client funds. My mother and father were active, willing co-conspirators in a massive federal Ponzi scheme. They had literally sold their daughter's life and planned her potential death for a massive financial payout. I placed every document exactly as I had found it. I closed the briefcase, spun the combination dials back to 0, and put it perfectly on the top shelf of the closet. I walked into the nursery and picked up Leo. I held his warm, small body against my chest, feeling his steady heartbeat against mine. They wanted to leave him motherless. They wanted to hand him over to a man capable of murder and a sister driven by pure malice. I could not go to the local police. My father played golf with the chief of police. Hudson managed the retirement portfolios of half the judges in our county. If I walked into a local precinct with this story, my family would be notified before I even finished filling out a report. I would be intercepted, drugged, and silenced permanently. I needed immediate federal intervention. I needed someone who understood the intricate mechanics of criminal law, someone who had the power to bypass the corrupt local authorities and trigger an immediate, overwhelming federal raid. I needed someone who hated my family just as much as I did someone who had also been deceived and discarded by their monstrous greed. There was only one person who fit that exact description perfectly. I carried Leo downstairs, placed him safely in his playpen, and pulled out my phone. I navigated to my contacts and stared at the name on the bright screen. It was time to make the call that would ignite the fire. I pressed the green call button next to Jamal's name and held the device tightly against my ear. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. I knew he was currently at work. As an assistant district attorney, his schedule was notoriously grueling. My parents frequently mocked his long hours, claiming a real man would leverage his law degree at a lucrative private firm rather than slaving away for a meager public sector salary. They never understood that Jamal was driven by a deep, unwavering sense of justice. He was a man who genuinely believed in dismantling corrupt systems, which made him the perfect weapon for my current situation. On the fourth ring, he answered. His voice was sharp and professional, carrying the distinct echo of a busy courthouse hallway. Jamal speaking. Jamal, it is Claire. There was a heavy pause on the line. In the 5 years he had been married to my sister Stella, I had never called him during business hours. We exchanged polite greetings at family dinners and shared knowing glances when my parents launched into their elitist monologues, but we rarely communicated privately. Claire. He said, his tone softening slightly but retaining its guarded edge. Is everything all right? Stella did not mention you were calling. Stella does not know I am calling, I replied instantly. And it is absolutely critical that she never finds out about this conversation. Are you in a place where you can speak freely? The background noise on his end shifted. I could hear a heavy door closing, followed by the muffled silence of an empty office. I am alone now, Jamal said cautiously. What is going on? You sound different. I am thinking clearly for the first time in years, I told him. I need your help, Jamal. I need the kind of help that only a federal prosecutor can provide. I heard him let out a long breath. Claire, if this is about your mother or William, you know I cannot get involved in family disputes. My position requires strict boundaries. This is not a family dispute, I stated, dropping my voice to a sharp whisper. This is a massive, coordinated federal crime. I have uncovered a highly sophisticated money laundering operation. It involves millions of dollars in stolen client funds. It involves offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, dummy corporations registered in Delaware, and multiple counts of wire fraud. The silence from his end was absolute. As an assistant district attorney, his entire career revolved around prosecuting complex crimes. I had just spoken his language perfectly. Are you talking about Hudson? Jamal asked. His voice was suddenly devoid of any familial warmth. It was the voice of a man preparing an indictment. Yes, I confirmed. But Hudson is not acting alone. He has a domestic partner helping him funnel the clean money. I have the digital ledger, Jamal. I extracted the transaction hashes directly from his encrypted server last night. I can prove every single wire transfer. I know exactly where the stolen money is landing, where Jamal demanded. Into a holding company jointly owned by Hudson and Stella, I revealed. I waited for the shock, the denial, or the angry defense of his wife. None of those things happened. Instead, I heard a dark, humorless chuckle escape his lips. It was the sound of a man who had just found the missing piece to a horrifying puzzle. A holding company, Jamal repeated slowly. Apex Pinnacle Ventures. My heart hammered against my ribs. You know about it. I found the incorporation documents hidden in Stella's car 2 weeks ago, he admitted, his voice hardening with restrained fury. I also found a secondary phone she has been using. I knew she was hiding something massive, but I could not access her financial records without a warrant. I could not figure out where the initial capital for that company came from. It came from my husband's clients, I explained. And my parents just remortgaged their entire estate to invest in it. They are completely intertwined in this scheme. But that is not even the worst part, Jamal. They are planning to pin the entire laundering operation on me. Hudson has forged a suicide note in my handwriting. They are going to murder me, stage it as a mental breakdown, and walk away with everything. I heard a loud crash on the other end of the line, like a fist slamming into a solid mahogany desk. Where are you right now? Jamal ordered, his prosecutorial instincts fully engaged. Are you safe? I am at my house, I said. Hudson thinks I am heavily sedated. He slipped pills into my tea this morning, but I spit them out. He is at his office, likely coordinating the final offshore transfers. You need to get out of that house immediately, Jamal instructed. Do not pack a bag. Do not take your primary vehicle. Do not use your credit cards. If Hudson is monitoring your financial footprint, any unusual movement will tip him off. I already have the cash, I assured him. And I have the decrypted ledgers on 2 separate physical flash drives. I just need to secure my son. I cannot leave Leo here. My trusted neighbor runs a highly vetted daycare center, Jamal said rapidly. She is discreet and has a secure facility. Drop Leo there under an assumed name. I will text you the address and the access code. After that, you and I need to meet. We cannot discuss the structural takedown of a money laundering syndicate over a cellular network. Where do we meet? I asked. There is an old diner off the interstate, Jamal said. It is cash only, no surveillance cameras, and completely off the grid for people like William and Catherine. Meet me there in exactly 2 hours. I will be there, I promised. Claire Jamal added before disconnecting. Do not underestimate them. They think you are a weak, medicated target. Use their arrogance against them. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I walked into the nursery where Leo was playing quietly with his wooden blocks. I packed a small, nondescript diaper bag with enough essentials for 3 days. I scooped my son into my arms, inhaling the sweet, powdery scent of his skin. I promised myself right then that he would never grow up in the toxic shadow of my family. I moved swiftly through the house, double-checking that I had left no physical evidence of my midnight investigation. The forged suicide note was safely locked back inside the vintage briefcase. The security cameras showed nothing but a quiet, empty living room. I stepped out the back door, bypassing the smart doorbell camera, and walked 2 blocks down the street before calling a local taxi service, using a burner phone I had purchased months ago for my own private investigations. The ride to the secure daycare was tense, but Jamal had arranged everything perfectly. The facility owner asked no questions and took Leo into her warm, capable arms. With my son entirely safe and completely off the grid, I instructed the taxi driver to take me to the highway edge. I paid him in cash and walked the remaining half-mile to the diner. The cold wind whipped my hair around my face, but I felt a burning, unstoppable energy radiating through my veins. The trap was about to be set. I pushed open the heavy glass door of the diner. A small bell chimed above my head, cutting through the low murmur of the few patrons scattered across the room. The air smelled strongly of burnt coffee and old frying grease. It was the perfect place for 2 people who needed to remain entirely invisible. I scanned the faded red vinyl booths lining the back wall. Jamal was already there. He sat in the darkest corner facing the entrance, his broad shoulders tense under a charcoal gray overcoat. He had not touched the mug of black coffee sitting on the table in front of him. I slid into the booth across from him. Up close, the toll of the last few weeks was undeniable on his face. The sharp, intimidating aura of the assistant district attorney was entirely gone. He just looked like a man who had realized his entire life was a carefully constructed lie. We stared at each other for a long moment. There was no need for polite greetings. We were bound by a shared catastrophic betrayal. Are you absolutely sure Leo is secure? Jamal asked, keeping his voice dangerously low. He is safe, I confirmed, pulling my laptop bag onto my lap. The daycare owner did not ask for my real name, and I paid her in untraceable cash. Hudson thinks I am lying in our bed, heavily sedated by the pills he gave me. He believes his plan is moving forward perfectly. Jamal nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Show me the ledgers, Claire. Show me exactly how they are planning to execute this. I unzipped my bag and pulled out the 2 encrypted flash drives. I placed them on the scratch table between us. I did not bring my laptop out. We could not risk connecting to any public wireless networks. Instead, I verbally walked him through the digital labyrinth I had untangled just hours ago. I explained the skimming operation at Hudson's wealth management firm. I detailed how Hudson had targeted elderly reclusive clients, slowly draining their accounts into offshore holding companies in the Cayman Islands. He used my professional credentials to set up 3 domestic shell corporations. I explained, watching Jamal's eyes darken with furious comprehension. He forged my digital signature and attached my forensic accounting license to legitimize the dummy companies. The stolen money is washed offshore and then funneled directly into those accounts. From there, the clean cash is transferred into Apex Pinnacle Ventures. The company he co-owns with Stella Jamal finished for me, his jaw clenching tightly. He is using your identity as a financial firewall. When the federal authorities inevitably notice the missing client funds, the digital trail leads exclusively to you. It gets much worse, I whispered, leaning closer across the table. They are not just setting me up for federal prison. They are planning to eliminate me completely. Jamal froze. The ambient noise of the clattering dishes and quiet conversations in the diner seemed to completely vanish. What do you mean, eliminate you? I told him about the vintage leather briefcase hidden on the top shelf of Hudson's closet. I described the meticulous physical ledger Hudson had forged in my exact handwriting, detailing the fake embezzlement scheme. Then I told him about the confession letter. I watched the blood drain from Jamal's face as I explained that it was actually a suicide note. I told him about the emails between Hudson, my mother, and the corrupt psychiatrist. They are coming for me next Friday, I said, my voice eerily calm. If the psychiatric committal hits a legal roadblock, Hudson will stage my suicide. He will leave that forged confession next to my body. He will play the devastated widower who had no idea his wife was a criminal mastermind. He gets full custody of Leo. My parents get to preserve their pristine social status while hiding the fact that they are deeply complicit in a massive federal Ponzi scheme. Your parents? Jamal repeated, his voice laced with absolute disgust. Tell me about William and Catherine. How deep are they in this? They are the anchor, I replied. They quietly remortgaged their entire estate. They liquidated every single dollar of their retirement portfolios. They handed all of their generational wealth directly to Hudson to invest in Apex Pinnacle Ventures. Hudson is paying them a massive fabricated return using the stolen client funds. My parents are actively financing a criminal enterprise because their greed is far stronger than their love for their own daughter. They sold my life for a higher yield. Jamal closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. The utter depravity of their actions was staggering. However, as a seasoned prosecutor, Jamal quickly transitioned from shock to calculated strategy. Hudson has committed wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Jamal stated, his prosecutorial instincts taking over. Catherine and William are guilty of conspiracy, bribery, and financial fraud. We have enough evidence to secure federal warrants for all of them. But we have to move with absolute precision. If we go to the local authorities, your father will use his country club connections to bury the investigation before it begins. We must take this directly to the federal level. I agree, I said, but we need a catalyst. We need an event where all the key players are present, where their assets are fully exposed, and where they cannot use their wealth to escape. Jamal opened his eyes. They were cold, hard, and entirely devoid of mercy. We will give them exactly what they want. We will let them believe they have won. We wait until they publicly celebrate their victory, and then we drop the hammer. I looked at him, feeling a sudden surge of adrenaline mixed with pure vindication. You have a specific event in mind. Yes, Jamal said softly. But before we discuss the structural takedown of this criminal syndicate, there is another layer to this betrayal. A layer that involves my wife and your husband. A layer that goes far beyond money laundering and corporate fraud. Jamal reached into the inner pocket of his charcoal overcoat. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and placed it squarely on the table next to my encrypted flash drives. The envelope was heavy, sealed with a metal clasp. I hired a private investigator 3 weeks ago, Jamal explained, his voice dropping to a harsh mechanical tone. I found a secondary phone hidden under the spare tire in Stella's car. I could not unlock it, but the discovery was enough to confirm my worst suspicions. I told the investigator to tail Stella every single day. I told him to document every location, every meeting, and every person she interacted with. I stared at the manila envelope. The air in the diner suddenly felt incredibly thin. The financial crimes were massive, but the look in Jamal's eyes suggested a devastation that stolen money could never buy. Open it, Claire, Jamal commanded softly. Look at what our beloved spouses have been doing while we were busy working to support them. My hands moved toward the envelope. I pulled the metal clasp back and lifted the top flap. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of glossy, high-resolution photographs. The absolute truth was about to shatter the final illusion of my entire existence. I slid the first photograph from the stack and placed it face up on the scratched table. It was a crisp, full-color image taken from across a busy street. Hudson was stepping out of a high-end boutique downtown. Stella was right beside him. Her hand was slipped casually into the back pocket of his tailored trousers. They were laughing at something, their faces tilted toward each other with an effortless, sickening intimacy. I moved the picture aside to reveal the next one. This was taken inside an underground parking garage. The harsh fluorescent lighting illuminated them perfectly. Hudson had Stella pinned against the passenger side of his sports car. His hands were gripping her waist and they were kissing with a desperate, ravenous hunger. The timestamp in the bottom corner of the image indicated it was taken on a Tuesday evening last month. Hudson had texted me that exact night, claiming he was stuck at the office reviewing quarterly portfolios and apologizing for missing Leo's bedtime. I kept dealing the photographs onto the table like a deck of tarot cards predicting absolute doom. Picture after picture showed them sharing expensive dinners, entering luxury hotel elevators, and walking through secluded parks. The physical evidence of their affair was undeniable. They had built an entire hidden life together while I was trapped at home, crying over my perceived inadequacies and swallowing the sedatives my husband handed me. Jamal sat perfectly still, letting me process the visual slaughter of my marriage. He had already survived the initial shock of seeing these images. Now he was just watching the identical realization hit me. I thought the financial crimes were the bottom of the abyss. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I thought framing me for federal embezzlement and plotting to stage my suicide was the absolute limit of their depravity. Keep looking, Jamal instructed, his eyes fixed on the remaining papers in the envelope. The affair is just the physical betrayal. The final document is the ultimate violation. I reached into the envelope again. My fingers brushed against a thick, folded sheet of official medical stationery. I pulled it out and flattened it on the table. It was a laboratory report from a certified DNA testing facility. I scanned the columns of genetic markers, my eyes jumping straight to the conclusion at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. I looked at the names listed on the document. Hudson was designated as the alleged father. Stella's youngest son, a bright-eyed 2-year-old boy I had bought birthday presents for, was listed as the child. The air in my lungs turned to ash. I read the names again, praying my exhausted brain was misinterpreting the data. But forensic accountants do not misinterpret data. The numbers were absolute. He is not mine, Jamal said. His voice cracked for a fraction of a second before he forced it back into a flat prosecutorial tone. I have raised that little boy for 2 years. I woke up for every midnight feeding. I taught him how to walk. I paid for his medical bills. I loved him as my own flesh and blood. But he belongs to the man you married. The timeline crashed over me like a tidal wave. Hudson had been sleeping with my sister long before I even became pregnant with Leo. While Hudson was comforting me through our difficulties, conceiving, he was actively fathering a child with Stella. While my parents were praising Hudson as the perfect son-in-law, they were likely turning a blind eye to his affair with their golden child. The sickening reality of their intertwined deception was almost too much for my mind to process. How did you find out? I asked, tracing the embossed seal on the laboratory report. I noticed Hudson paying an unusual amount of attention to the boy at family gatherings, Jamal explained. It was nothing overt, just lingering glances, a strange possessiveness when the baby cried. Then I found the burner phone in Stella's car. I could not bypass the passcode, but I saw a single notification pop up on the lock screen. It was a message from Hudson asking about the baby's pediatric appointment. I swabbed the inside of the boy's cheek that same night and paid a private lab to run it against a DNA sample I pulled from a discarded coffee cup Hudson left at our house. Jamal leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His hands were clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. Stella and Hudson are not just having a casual affair, Claire. They are a deeply enmeshed parallel family unit. They are using us to fund their lifestyle and maintain their social cover until they are ready to merge their lives completely. I felt a dark, violent energy pooling in my chest. They want to steal my son, I said, the realization crystallizing into absolute fact. They are going to commit me, drain my accounts, and then Hudson will take Leo. He and Stella will raise my son alongside their biological child, using the millions they laundered through my identity. They want to erase us entirely. They are going to try. Jamal corrected his eyes, locking onto mine with an intense, burning resolve. But they are going to fail. I have already drafted my divorce filings. I have secured an emergency ex parte order granting me sole physical and legal custody of my oldest child, who is biologically mine. I am completely detaching Stella from my life. But I was waiting for the right moment to serve her. I was waiting to find the source of the illicit money she was hoarding. Now you have the source, I said, tapping the encrypted flash drives on the table. We have the financial records. We have the proof of money laundering. We have the evidence of their affair and the paternity test. We have the paper trail connecting my parents to the entire fraudulent enterprise. We have everything, Jamal agreed. The puzzle is completely solved. Hudson and Stella think they are playing a brilliant game of chess. They think we are just blind, obedient pawns. But they made the fatal mistake of leaving their digital and biological footprints everywhere. I gathered the photographs and the DNA report, sliding them back into the manila envelope. The tears I thought I might shed over my broken marriage were entirely gone. Hudson was no longer my husband. He was a hostile target. Stella was no longer my sister. She was a co-conspirator. My parents were no longer my family. They were active accomplices in my attempted destruction. We need to finalize the timeline, I told Jamal. Hudson expects the corrupt psychiatrist to sign the committal papers by next Friday. That means my parents and Hudson will likely finalize the offshore transfers by Thursday. We have exactly 6 days to coordinate the federal response and set the trap. Jamal pulled a small notepad from his pocket. 6 days is plenty of time for a federal prosecutor and a forensic accountant to burn a criminal syndicate to the ground. Let us talk about William and Catherine's anniversary gala. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that felt entirely new on my face. The 40-year anniversary gala was the crown jewel of my parents' social calendar. They had rented out the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. It was supposed to be a night where they paraded their wealth and their perfect daughters in front of hundreds of elite guests. It would be the absolute perfect stage for a public execution. The pieces were falling into place seamlessly. The devastating double betrayal had not broken me. It had simply provided the ultimate motivation to ruin them all. Jamal watched the realization settle over my features. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a low, commanding register. The gala is perfectly timed, he said. William and Catherine are using the anniversary dinner to formally announce Apex Pinnacle Ventures to their high society friends. They want to solicit more investments from the country club elite to inflate the fund. Hudson is going to present himself as the brilliant financial architect behind the family empire. I nodded, seeing the entire blueprint unfold in my mind. And they need me out of the picture before they make that public push. If I am locked away in a psychiatric facility or dead from a staged suicide, no one will question why my name is tied to the initial shell corporations. They will just view me as a tragic liability they had to overcome. Exactly, Jamal confirmed. He pulled a pen from his breast pocket and began sketching a rigid timeline on a paper napkin. Today is Saturday. We have exactly 5 days until the gala on Thursday night. Hudson expects the corrupt psychiatrist to finalize your involuntary committal on Friday morning. We have to blindside them before that happens. We have to coordinate a synchronized strike combining financial freezes and federal arrests. I tapped my fingernail against the encrypted flash drives resting between us. I can prepare a comprehensive digital dossier for the Securities and Exchange Commission by tomorrow morning. I know exactly which investigators handle offshore money laundering. I have worked alongside them during corporate audits. If I send them the transaction hashes and the direct links to Apex Pinnacle Ventures, they will have enough probable cause to freeze every single account associated with Hudson and my parents within 72 hours. Jamal stared at the flash drives. The SEC moves fast when presented with undeniable proof of a Ponzi scheme, he acknowledged. But we cannot rely solely on financial regulators. We need criminal warrants. We need federal agents physically walking into that ballroom. Hudson is guilty of wire fraud and conspiracy. The local police department is useless here. William plays golf with the chief of police. Catherine hosts charity luncheons with the local judges. If we file anything at the precinct level, the desk sergeant will call your father before the ink is dry. I felt a surge of cold dread at the thought, but Jamal raised his hand to stop me. That is where I come in, he continued. As an assistant district attorney, I have direct channels to the Federal Bureau of Investigation White-Collar Crime Division. I have built a solid reputation with their lead agents over the last 5 years. I will bypass the local jurisdiction entirely. I will hand-deliver your forensic dossier to the federal task force on Monday morning. I will explain the flight risk and the imminent threat to your life regarding the falsified psychiatric hold. The FBI will prioritize this because it involves millions in stolen funds from high-profile clients. I looked at Jamal with a profound sense of respect. My parents had spent years mocking him, calling him a diversity hire, and treating him like a stain on their pristine family portrait. They had no idea they had invited a brilliant, methodical predator into their inner circle. Jamal was going to be the architect of their physical incarceration. "What about Stella?" I asked, my voice devoid of any sisterly affection. "She is a co-owner of Apex Pinnacle Ventures. She is receiving the laundered funds directly. Will the federal agents arrest her at the gala too?" Jamal shook his head slowly. "Stella is incredibly manipulative, but she is also incredibly lazy. Hudson structured the dummy corporations to insulate her from the direct wire fraud. She will likely avoid immediate federal prison time by claiming ignorance of the source of the funds. But she will not escape the destruction. The moment the SEC freezes, Apex Pinnacle Ventures, she loses every single cent. Her bank accounts, her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicles. All of it will be seized as products of illicit funds." He paused, his dark eyes hardening into obsidian. "And that is when I serve her the divorce papers and the emergency custody order. I am taking my son. She will be left with nothing but a penniless federal criminal and the child they conceived in secret. She will be entirely destitute." It was a flawless, devastating strategy. The legal and financial mechanisms were perfectly aligned. The only variable left was my ability to maintain the illusion of compliance. "I have to go back to the house," I said, the reality of my assignment settling heavily on my shoulders. "I have to sleep next to the man who forged my suicide note. I have to let him think he is winning. I have to act like a woman losing her mind so he does not panic and move the offshore funds early." Jamal reached across the table and placed his large, steady hand over mine. "You are the strongest person in that family, Claire. You have survived a lifetime of their emotional abuse. You can survive 5 more days of playing the fool. Keep your head down. Do not argue with him. Take whatever pills he gives you and spit them out in secret. Let him dictate the narrative. Every time he acts arrogant, just remember you hold the match that will burn his life to the ground." I nodded, drawing strength from his absolute certainty. "I will not fail, Jamal. My son's life depends on my performance. I will be the perfect broken victim." We finalized the communication protocol. We could not call or text each other using our primary devices. Hudson could easily have installed spyware on my personal phone. Jamal handed me a cheap prepaid burner phone he had purchased in cash. We agreed to communicate only through encrypted messaging apps using coded language regarding our respective legal maneuvers. If I felt my physical safety was in immediate unpredictable danger before Thursday, I was to send a single blank message, and Jamal would trigger an early raid. I packed the DNA tests, the private investigator photographs, and my encrypted flash drives back into my secure laptop bag. I stood up from the vinyl booth. The diner felt suffocatingly warm, but my mind was a landscape of pure ice. We walked out into the gravel parking lot together. The gray morning sky was beginning to break, revealing harsh, bright sunlight. Jamal unlocked his car door and looked at me across the roof of his sedan. "I will see you at the gala, Claire. Wear something spectacular. I will be wearing red," I replied, my voice steady and completely fearless. I watched him drive away, the tires kicking up dust as he merged onto the highway. I climbed into my rental car and gripped the steering wheel. The pact was forged in iron and undeniable proof. I had spent my entire existence trying to earn a place at a table built on lies and conditional love. I had played the obedient daughter and the supportive wife. Now I was the executioner. I started the engine and drove toward the gilded cage I called home, ready to embrace the darkness until it was time to turn on the lights. I pulled slowly into my long driveway, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my hands ached. The massive house stood before me like a fortress of lies. I took one deep breath. The forensic accountant was securely locked away inside the darkest corners of my mind. It was time for the fragile wife to take the stage. I dragged my suitcase, letting it scrape against the concrete. I slumped my shoulders forward, unlocked the oak door, and pushed it open, stepping into the foyer with a dramatic sigh. Hudson appeared at the top of the staircase instantly. He was dressed in expensive cashmere, holding a glass of bourbon. His face registered pure shock. He had expected me to be halfway to Chicago by now. The shock vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by a mask of deep concern. "Claire," he called out, rushing down the stairs. He set his glass on the console table and wrapped his arms around me in a tight embrace. "What happened? You look terrible. Why are you not on your flight?" I leaned my weight against his chest, suppressing the urge to recoil from the scent of his cologne. It was the same one he wore when he kissed my sister. "I could not get on the plane, Hudson," I whispered, letting my voice crack flawlessly. The walls started closing in at the terminal. I could not breathe at all. I felt like I was choking. "I am truly losing my mind." He stroked my hair with feigned tenderness. "Shh, it is okay," he murmured. "You are just overworked. You are utterly exhausted. I told you last week that you were pushing yourself way too hard. This is exactly what Dr. Vance warned us about." He led me to the living room couch, guiding me to the exact spot where he and Stella had been plotting my institutionalization hours prior. He covered me with a heavy blanket. The irony was suffocating. He was tucking me in while actively preparing my grave. "I will make you some tea," he said smoothly. "Just rest right here." He disappeared into the kitchen. I kept my eyes closed, controlling my heart rate. I knew exactly what was happening in that kitchen. He was crushing the heavy sedatives into a fine powder and stirring them into the hot water. He needed me docile. He needed me confused and unable to articulate a coherent sentence to anyone who might ask questions. When he returned, he held a steaming ceramic mug. He sat beside me and pressed the warm cup into my palms. "Drink this," he urged softly. "Dr. Vance said this mild supplement would help calm your nerves during these anxiety episodes. You have to take care of yourself, Claire. For me, for Leo." Using our son as a weapon made me want to strike him. Instead, I took the mug. I brought it to my lips, pretending to take a deep swallow, but let the hot liquid pool in my cheeks. When Hudson checked his phone, I spat the tainted tea into the fern next to the sofa. I repeated this charade 3 times until the mug was nearly empty. "I just need to lie down right now," I murmured, letting my eyelids droop. "The exhaustion is pulling me under." Hudson practically carried me upstairs. He bypassed our bedroom and took me straight to the guest room. He claimed the guest bed was better for my back. The truth was, he did not want me near his personal space or devices. He tucked me under the duvet, kissed my forehead with Judas-like precision, and turned off the lamp. "I will be right down the hall if you need me," he whispered before softly closing the door. I lay perfectly still in the dark room, regulating my breathing. I listened to his footsteps retreat down the hall. A moment later, I heard a door locking. He was sealing himself inside his office. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was texting Stella and updating my mother. He was telling them the unstable wife had returned, but the situation was entirely under control. The next 48 hours were psychological warfare. I lived alongside my predator, sharing meals with a man planning my destruction. Sunday morning arrived with a heavy downpour. Hudson hovered over me at the breakfast table, offering another cup of his special tea. I performed my spitting routine into the sink while pretending to wash a dish. I walked into the nursery to check on Leo, who had been brought back from daycare by Hudson, blissfully unaware of his father's true nature. Holding my son gave me the strength to endure the charade. I rocked Leo in my arms, whispering silent promises into his soft hair. We were going to be safe. Hudson leaned against the nursery doorframe, watching us with a calculating gaze. My parents want us to come over for Sunday dinner tonight, he announced casually. Your mother thinks it would be good for you to get out of the house. She is very worried about your mental state, Claire. She wants to discuss options. My blood ran cold, but my face remained perfectly blank. I knew exactly what options Catherine wanted to discuss. This was the setup for the legal ambush Jamal and I had anticipated. They were going to make their move for my assets. I looked down at Leo, then back at Hudson. I offered him a weak, grateful smile. You are right, I said softly. Dinner with my family sounds exactly like what I need right now. Hudson smiled back, his eyes gleaming with hidden victory. He thought he was leading a lamb to the slaughter. He had no idea he was walking straight into a meticulously designed federal trap. I kissed Leo's forehead and set him in his crib. It was time to get dressed. It was time to sign my life away just to watch them choke on it. The drive to my parents' sprawling estate was suffocatingly quiet. Hudson kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting heavily on my thigh, a physical gesture of absolute control disguised as marital comfort. When we pulled through the wrought iron gates, the massive brick facade of Catherine and William's home loomed against the darkening evening sky. I stepped out of the car, clutching my purse tightly, and forced my hands to tremble as we walked up the stone pathway to the front door. My mother swung the door open before Hudson even reached the bell. Catherine wore a pristine silk blouse and a look of immediate calculating assessment. Her sharp eyes raked over my simple beige sweater and unstyled hair. Claire, you look absolutely washed out, my mother said, sighing dramatically as she pulled me into a stiff, loveless embrace. Hudson told us all about your little episode at the airport. We are all very concerned about your rapid decline. I kept my gaze fixed firmly on the polished marble floor. I am just tired, Mother, I murmured, playing the broken victim perfectly. Stella glided into the foyer, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She looked flawless in a fitted emerald dress, radiating the unearned confidence of a woman who thought she held all the winning cards. Behind her stood Jamal. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. His expression was a masterclass in stoicism. He offered a polite, distant nod, perfectly playing the role of the disconnected brother-in-law. Hudson, Stella purred, stepping forward to greet my husband. She reached out and unnecessarily adjusted the lapel of his jacket. Her fingers lingered against the expensive fabric just a second too long. We missed you at the club yesterday. Hudson smiled down at her, a predatory glint flashing in his eye. I had to stay home and care for Claire. Family comes first, Stella. The sheer audacity of the exchange made my stomach turn, but I maintained my vacant, medicated expression. We moved into the formal dining room, taking our assigned seats around the long mahogany table. The meal felt like a highly orchestrated theatrical performance where I was the only one not given a script. The clinking of heavy silver against fine china sounded like a ticking clock. My father, William, dominated the conversation, aggressively praising Hudson's financial acumen. He boasted about the incredible returns Hudson was generating, blissfully unaware that he was bragging about a federal Ponzi scheme funded by his own liquidated retirement accounts. Jamal sat quietly cutting his steak with deliberate precision. Every time my mother threw a thinly veiled insult about my lack of energy or my failing mental health, Jamal would take a slow sip of his water. It was our silent communication. We were two ghosts haunting a table of criminals biding our time. As the maid cleared our dinner plates, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The casual cruelty stopped, replaced by a sudden predatory focus. My father cleared his throat and gestured toward his study. The ambush I had been preparing for was finally here. William pushed his chair back from the table and stood up. He motioned for us to follow him down the hall. Hudson placed his hand firmly on the small of my back, guiding me forward like a fragile patient. My mother and Stella trailed closely behind us, their silence heavy with anticipation. Jamal lingered near the doorway, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. The study was a dark room lined with leather-bound books and smelling faintly of expensive cigars. My father sat behind his massive mahogany desk. He unlocked the top drawer and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, placing them squarely in the center of the desk. Claire, my father began, his tone shifting into the authoritative voice he used for hostile corporate takeovers. Hudson came to us yesterday with some very serious concerns. We all see how much you are struggling. You are forgetting things. You are having panic attacks. You are completely failing to manage your daily responsibilities. My mother stepped forward, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We just want to help you heal, sweetheart. You need to focus entirely on getting better without the stress of managing your finances or your business assets. Hudson stepped closer, wrapping his arms securely around my shoulders. Let me carry this burden for you, Claire. I can handle the accounts while you rest. It is just a temporary measure until you are well again. My father tapped a gold pen against the thick stack of papers. This is a comprehensive power of attorney. It gives Hudson full legal control over your personal savings, your business holdings, and Leo's trust accounts. It is entirely for your own protection. I stared at the paperwork. They were cornering me in my own childhood home, using my fake illness to steal everything I had ever worked for. I let my hands shake visibly as I reached for the documents. I kept my eyes wide and frightened. But what if I do not want to sign it? I asked, letting a tear slip down my cheek. My mother dropped the sympathetic act instantly, her face hardened into a mask of pure malice. If you do not sign it tonight, we will call Dr. Vance right now. He already has the paperwork drawn up to have you involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility by tomorrow morning. You will lose your son, Claire. Do not test us. I reached up to wipe my tear, my fingers brushing against the hidden microphone pinned beneath the collar of my sweater. I had just recorded my mother explicitly blackmailing me with a fraudulent psychiatric hold. I picked up the gold pen. I looked at Jamal standing quietly by the door. He gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. I leaned over the desk and signed the documents exactly where my father pointed. But I did not use my legal signature. I used an old variation of my maiden name, ensuring the documents were legally void the moment they were scrutinized by a federal judge. Hudson snatched the papers from the desk the second my pen lifted. He looked at Stella, and they shared a brief, triumphant smile. They thought they had won. They thought they had completely broken me. They had no idea they had just handed me the final nail for their coffins. Hudson practically shoved the signed documents into his leather briefcase, his eyes gleaming with greedy satisfaction. My mother exhaled a long breath, adjusting her silk blouse, as if my supposed surrender had simply been a tedious chore. She finally crossed off her list. We left their house shortly after, with Hudson playing the role of the devoted husband guiding his fragile wife to the car. Jamal remained by the door, our eyes never meeting again, but the silent promise of absolute destruction hung heavily in the air between us. For the next 48 hours, I played my part flawlessly. I stayed in the guest bedroom, wrapped in blankets, pretending to be paralyzed by severe anxiety. Hudson brought me my meals and my tainted tea, which I continued to secretly pour down the bathroom sink. The moment he left for his office, I locked my door and opened my encrypted laptop. I had maintained full undetected access to his desktop server, and I watched his digital footprints unfold in real time. Armed with the fraudulent power of attorney, Hudson moved with reckless, greedy speed. He was arrogant, completely convinced that my signature gave him an impenetrable shield against any future audits. Through my monitoring software, I watched him initiate massive coordinated wire transfers. He rapidly drained the offshore accounts and the dummy corporations registered in my name. I tracked him funneling exactly $42 million of stolen client funds directly into the domestic corporate account for Apex Pinnacle Ventures. The new real estate firm he co-owned with Stella was now completely flush with illegal cash. But the most satisfying part of the financial snare involved my parents. I hacked into my father's primary banking portal using security answers I had memorized years ago. I watched their final devastating transactions execute perfectly. William and Catherine officially signed away their sprawling estate, pulling out a maximum capacity second mortgage. They ruthlessly liquidated their entire retirement portfolio, cashing out every stock, bond, and mutual fund they had carefully accumulated over 40 years. They wired every single cent directly into Hudson's new firm, expecting a massive return on their investment. They were voluntarily tying their entire net worth to a federal Ponzi scheme built exclusively on laundered money. I meticulously documented every single routing number, authorization code, and timestamp. I captured the digital signatures and compiled the transaction hashes into a pristine, undeniably damning forensic dossier. My parents and my husband had legally and financially bound themselves to a fraudulent entity that was about to be seized by the federal government. There was absolutely no plausible deniability left for any of them. I saved the final encrypted file onto my flash drive and sent a single coded message to Jamal. The snare was locked tight. Hudson, Stella, Catherine, and William had eagerly chained themselves to a sinking ship. All I had to do now was put on my red dress, walk into their grand anniversary gala, and pull the plug. Thursday morning arrived with a suffocating sense of anticipation. Hudson was practically buzzing with arrogant energy. He kissed my forehead, told me to stay in bed, and promised he would bring me leftover cake from the gala. He left early to oversee the ballroom preparations with Stella. They were treating my parents' 40th wedding anniversary as their personal coronation. I spent the afternoon transforming myself. The fragile, sedated woman vanished the moment I stepped into the shower. I washed away days of feigned exhaustion. I styled my hair in sleek, sharp waves. I applied my makeup with ruthless precision. Then I slipped into the dress. It was a tailored crimson evening gown that commanded absolute attention. It was not the dress of a defeated wife. It was the armor of a woman ready for war. My phone chimed on the vanity. It was a text from Catherine. "Take the night off and rest, Claire. We will celebrate quietly with you tomorrow. Love you." I stared at the screen, marveling at her ability to lie so effortlessly. She was telling me she loved me while actively finalizing the paperwork to lock me in a psychiatric facility. I deleted the message and locked my phone. I grabbed my clutch, making sure the final physical copies of the encrypted ledgers were safely tucked inside, just in case Jamal needed a tangible prop. I walked out of my house, locking the door behind me, knowing I would never return to this tainted life. My son Leo was safely tucked away at the secure daycare, completely shielded from the fallout. I had everything I needed to burn their empire to the ground. A sleek black town car was waiting at the end of the block. I opened the heavy door and slid into the back seat. Jamal was already inside. He wore a custom midnight blue tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He looked sharp, focused, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Are the federal agents in position?" I asked, smoothing the skirt of my red dress. Jamal checked his encrypted burner phone. "The task force secured the perimeter 20 minutes ago. They are waiting in unmarked vehicles in the underground parking garage. The moment you give the signal, they lock down every exit. No one leaves that ballroom until Hudson is in handcuffs, and every asset is frozen." We rode in silence as the city lights blurred past the tinted windows. The gravity of what we were about to do settled over us. We were not just exposing an affair or a financial crime. We were detonating a bomb that would obliterate the highest echelons of local society. My parents had invited the mayor, several judges, and the wealthiest investors in the state. They wanted an audience to witness the launch of Apex Pinnacle Ventures. We were going to use that exact same audience to witness their absolute destruction. The town car pulled up to the grand entrance of the Grand Imperial Hotel. It was a towering monument to old money and elitism. Valets rushed to open the doors of luxury vehicles, ushering women in diamonds and men in tailored suits up the marble steps. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and blooming floral arrangements. I stepped out of the car, the cool evening air hitting my face. Jamal walked around to my side and offered his arm. I looped my arm through his. We did not look like the discarded, unwanted spouses. We looked like the executioners. We walked past the glittering fountain and approached the main doors. A pair of private security guards stood checking names off a digital guest list on a tablet. My parents had undoubtedly ensured our names were completely removed from that list. They wanted this night to belong exclusively to their golden child and their perfect son-in-law. They wanted to bask in the glory of their new real estate empire without the embarrassment of my presence or the inconvenience of Jamal. "Excuse me, sir," one of the guards said, stepping into our path as we approached the velvet ropes. "I need to see your invitations." Jamal did not miss a beat. He reached into his tuxedo pocket, pulled out his official gold assistant district attorney badge, and flashed it directly in the guard's face. "Official business," Jamal stated with a voice that brooked absolutely zero arguments. "Step aside." The guard's eyes widened. He immediately lowered the tablet and took a step back, gesturing for us to proceed. We walked past the velvet ropes and entered the grand foyer of the hotel. The sound of a live string quartet drifted down the sweeping staircase, mingling with the low hum of hundreds of wealthy guests clinking champagne flutes. We climbed the marble steps together, the heels of my shoes clicking a steady rhythmic countdown. At the top of the stairs, a massive banner stood outside the main ballroom doors. It read, "Celebrating 40 Years of Excellence, William and Catherine." Right below it, in equally large gold lettering, it proudly announced the official launch of Apex Pinnacle Ventures. Hudson and Stella had spared no expense. They had used the stolen client funds to rent out the entire top floor. They had hired premium caterers, imported rare orchids, and invited the local press to cover their grand debut. They had built a glittering multi-million-dollar stage to celebrate a company entirely funded by federal wire fraud and my stolen identity. I looked at the heavy gilded doors leading into the ballroom. Behind those doors, my husband was currently networking with the elite, likely securing even more fraudulent investments. My sister was playing the perfect business partner, basking in the stolen wealth. My parents were drinking vintage champagne, celebrating the fact that they had successfully sold my life for a 30% return. They thought they had won. They thought they had outsmarted the quiet, boring accountant and the working-class prosecutor. They thought they could discard us like trash and dance on our graves. I turned to Jamal. He met my gaze, his dark eyes reflecting the same cold, unyielding resolve that burned in my chest. There was no hesitation left. There was no lingering loyalty or fear. We had meticulously gathered the evidence, we had secured the federal task force, and we had placed ourselves perfectly at the epicenter of their false kingdom. "Ready?" Jamal asked softly. I adjusted my posture, standing tall in my crimson gown. "I have been ready my entire life," I replied. I reached out and placed my hands flat against the heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom. The time for playing the fool was officially over. It was time to pull the plug and watch them drown. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool, polished wood beneath my palms. I pushed the doors wide open, stepping boldly into the blinding light. The heavy mahogany doors yielded under my palms, opening into a blinding wave of light and sound. The sheer extravagance of the ballroom hit me like a physical force. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over hundreds of the most influential people in the city. Women in designer gowns and men in expensive tuxedos milled around massive ice sculptures and towering floral arrangements. A string quartet played a lively classical piece in the corner. Waiters in pristine white coats circulated with silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and caviar. It was a masterpiece of manufactured elegance. Every single detail in this room was paid for with stolen money. My stolen identity. My ruined life. But standing there in my crimson gown, I did not feel ruined. I felt invincible. Beside me, Jamal stood tall and unyielding. The midnight blue of his tuxedo caught the light, making him look less like an uninvited guest and more like an avenging angel. We stepped onto the thick carpet. For the first few seconds, no one noticed the anomaly. The elite crowd was too busy networking and admiring the lavish displays. But then the ripple started. A few guests near the entrance turned their heads. They recognized me as William and Catherine's reclusive daughter, the one who supposedly suffered from severe mental health issues. They recognized Jamal, the son-in-law, who was never fully accepted into their exclusive circle. I scanned the room with the clinical precision of a predator locking onto its prey. Across the sea of attendees, I spotted them. Hudson and Stella were standing near the main stage. They were holding court, surrounded by wealthy investors who were practically begging to hand over their portfolios to the brilliant new real estate firm. Hudson was laughing at a joke, his teeth flashing white against his tan. Stella was leaning into him, playing the role of the devoted business partner. She wore a diamond necklace that I knew for a fact was purchased with my drained savings account. They looked untouchable. Then Hudson's eyes flicked over the crowd and landed directly on me. The transformation was instantaneous and beautiful. The arrogant laugh died in his throat. His jaw went slack. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to comprehend how the heavily sedated, mentally unstable wife he had left locked in a guest room was currently standing at the back of the ballroom looking like a queen. Stella noticed his shock and followed his gaze. Her manicured hand flew to her chest, her emerald dress suddenly looking dull against her pale skin. Before either of them could react, a sharp movement caught my peripheral vision. My mother had spotted me. Catherine was standing near the towering champagne pyramid, deep in conversation with a prominent city councilman. She excused herself abruptly, leaving the politician mid-sentence. She marched across the ballroom floor like a heat-seeking missile. Her face, usually a carefully constructed mask of high society grace, was contorted with absolute rage. She navigated through the crowd, her heels digging fiercely into the carpet, desperate to intercept me before I could mingle with the guests. I stood my ground, my chin held high. Jamal remained perfectly still at my side. We waited as my mother closed the distance. When she finally reached us, she did not bother with fake pleasantries. She completely abandoned the loving, concerned mother act. She grabbed my upper arm, her manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into my flesh. "What are you doing here?" Catherine hissed. Her voice was a venomous whisper, perfectly calibrated so the nearby guests could not hear her fury. "I told you to stay home. You are sick. You are supposed to be resting in bed. Are you trying to ruin your sister's big night? Get out of here right now, you absolute failure." I looked down at the hand gripping my arm. For 34 years, that grip had controlled my life. It had steered me away from my passions, pushed me into the shadows, and guided me toward the slaughterhouse. Not tonight. I raised my opposite hand and grabbed her wrist. With a single forceful motion, I peeled her fingers off my arm and tossed her hand away. "I would not miss this for the world, Mother," I replied. My voice was deadly calm, carrying an icy authority that made her physically recoil. "I am feeling much better. In fact, I have never felt more lucid in my entire life." Catherine stared at me, genuine panic finally breaking through her anger. She looked from me to Jamal, noticing his stony expression and his immaculate tuxedo. She realized instantly that Jamal was not here to drag me back home. He was here as my escort. "Jamal!" My mother spat, her upper lip curling in disgust. "What is the meaning of this? Did you bring her here to cause a scene? William and I explicitly told you both that tonight was a private corporate event. You need to take your sister-in-law and leave this hotel immediately before I call security and have you both thrown out onto the street." Jamal offered her a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Security works for the Hotel Catherine. They do not work for you. And I strongly advise you to lower your voice. You would not want to cause a public disturbance on such a momentous evening. It might make your investors nervous." My father, William, had finally noticed the confrontation. He detached himself from a group of bankers and began hurrying toward us. He looked panicked, his eyes darting between me, Jamal, and the nearby guests, who were openly staring at our tense huddle. "Claire," my father said breathlessly as he arrived. He reached out as if to take my arm, but thought better of it when he saw the look in my eyes. "You need to go home. You are not well. Hudson has been worried sick about your condition. Please let us just walk you outside to a taxi. We can handle this privately." "I am done handling things privately, William," I said, dropping the title of father forever. "Privacy is exactly how you operate in the shadows. Privacy is how you steal, how you lie, and how you manipulate. We are doing things publicly from now on." I stepped around my parents, leaving them frozen in stunned disbelief. Jamal fell into step right beside me. We walked purposefully down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. Whispers erupted around the tables as people noticed the fierce determination in my stride and the pure panic painted on my parents' faces as they scrambled to follow us. Hudson realized exactly what was happening. He frantically signaled to the event security staff standing near the stage, desperately trying to get them to intercept me. But the security guards did not move. They had already been approached by the undercover federal agents waiting in the wings. They had been instructed to stand down and let the events unfold. Hudson was completely defenseless. I kept my eyes locked on the main stage. The oversized banner hung above it, proudly displaying the name of the fraudulent company that had stolen my identity. I walked past the ice sculptures. I walked past the champagne pyramids. I walked past the wealthy investors who had unknowingly funded their own demise. I was a forensic accountant, and I was about to deliver the most devastating financial audit of my career. The microphone was waiting. I reached the edge of the stage. The short flight of carpeted stairs stood between me and the glittering platform where Hudson and Stella were frozen in place. I did not hesitate. I climbed the steps with measured, deliberate strides. My crimson gown trailed behind me like a stream of blood. Jamal stayed on the floor, positioning himself perfectly at the base of the stairs to block anyone who might try to follow me. My mother and father had finally reached the front, gasping for air, but Jamal stood like a stone wall between them and the stage. Hudson snapped out of his shock just as I reached the center of the platform. He relied on his ultimate weapon, his manufactured charm. He forced a wide, blinding smile and stepped toward me, holding the silver microphone in his right hand. He opened his left arm as if to embrace me in front of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hudson announced, his voice booming through the sound system. "What a wonderful surprise! My beautiful wife, Claire, has decided to join us after all. She has been dealing with some severe health challenges recently, but she is so dedicated to our family that she pushed through her exhaustion to be here. Please give her a warm welcome." A smattering of polite, confused applause echoed through the grand ballroom. Guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. I stepped right into Hudson's personal space. He tried to pull me into a hug, whispering frantically in my ear. He told me to smile and get off the stage immediately, or he would ruin my life. I ignored his threat. I reached down and firmly grasped the microphone. For a split second, a physical tug of war happened in plain sight. He gripped the metal handle tightly, his knuckles turning white, but I stared directly into his panicked eyes. I gave him a look so utterly void of fear that his confidence finally shattered. His grip loosened. I pulled the microphone smoothly from his hand. I turned to face the sea of wealthy investors, local politicians, and high society socialites. The room fell dead silent. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. You could hear the clinking of ice and glasses cease completely. "Good evening," I said. My voice echoed off the crystal chandeliers, crystal clear and absolutely steady. "Hudson speaks of family dedication and loyalty. It is a beautiful sentiment for a celebration like this. But I am not here tonight to celebrate family or loyalty. I am here to speak about something far more tangible. I am here to talk about money deception and federal wire fraud." The silence in the ballroom deepened into a suffocating vacuum. I saw the mayor sitting at a front table, slowly lowering his champagne flute. I saw prominent bankers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Beside me, Hudson took a step forward, reaching out a shaking hand to reclaim the microphone. "Claire, please." Hudson stammered, entirely abandoning his polished persona. "You are having an episode. Let me help you down from here." I stepped away from his grasping hand. "I am not having an episode," I continued, projecting my voice to reach the very back of the room. "I am a senior forensic accountant. My entire career is dedicated to dismantling corporate fraud and tracking hidden money across international borders. And as of 10 minutes ago, I am officially working as a cooperating informant alongside the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The gasp that ripped through the crowd was visceral. Hundreds of people inhaled sharply all at once. Stella took a frantic step back, her emerald dress catching the light as she tried to retreat into the shadows of the stage displays. Hudson stood paralyzed, his mouth hanging open as the realization of his doom finally pierced his arrogance. "The new real estate firm you are celebrating tonight," I announced, sweeping my arm toward the massive gold banner displaying the Apex Pinnacle Ventures logo, "is not a legitimate business. It is a domestic shell corporation. It is built entirely on $42 million of laundered funds stolen directly from Hudson's previous wealth management clients. Chaos immediately erupted at the tables closest to the stage. Several older gentlemen men I recognized as Hudson's longest-standing clients stood up from their chairs in pure shock. Shouts of disbelief rang out. Several investors began pulling out their phones, frantically calling their financial institutions despite the late hour. I raised my voice to cut through the rising panic. Do not bother checking your investment portfolios tonight. I have already handed the complete decrypted digital ledger directly to the federal authorities. I bypassed the firewalls on Hudson's private server. I tracked every single offshore wire transfer through the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. I documented the exact routing numbers he used to funnel your stolen life savings into this fake venture. Hudson finally broke out of his paralysis. He lunged at me, his face twisted in absolute rage. "You lying lunatic," he screamed. Before his hands could even graze my arms, Jamal vaulted up the stage stairs with terrifying speed. Jamal grabbed Hudson by the collar of his expensive tuxedo and shoved him backward. Hudson stumbled and fell hard onto the polished wooden floor of the stage. Jamal stood over him, a physically imposing barrier of righteous fury. "Stay down," Jamal ordered, his voice echoing without the need for a microphone. I did not even flinch. I kept my eyes locked on the crowd. "The accounts are completely frozen," I declared. "Every single cent tied to Apex Pinnacle Ventures has been locked down by the federal government. For those of you who wrote investment checks tonight, cancel them immediately. For those of you who handed your retirement funds to my husband, your money is currently part of an active federal criminal investigation." I looked down at the front row. My mother, Catherine, was clutching the edge of her table. She looked like she was suffocating. My father, William, was stark white, clutching his chest as the reality of his own financial ruin settled in. He had remortgaged his entire estate and drained his retirement accounts to fund this very company. He was now penniless, tied to a massive Ponzi scheme. And to my parents, I said, making sure every guest in the room heard me clearly, "Thank you for your endless support. Thank you for trying to bribe a corrupt psychiatrist to have me committed to a mental institution so you could steal my assets. I have submitted the financial receipts of your bribes to the medical board and the federal task force. Your involvement in this money laundering syndicate is fully documented." The high society crowd turned their horrified gazes toward my parents. The people who had worshipped William and Catherine just moments ago were now looking at them with sheer disgust. The social standing my mother cared about more than her own daughter was instantly vaporized. She was ruined in front of the only audience she ever valued. Stella burst into tears on the stage. She dropped to her knees, hiding her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as her glamorous life dissolved into thin air. Hudson remained on the floor, staring blankly at the ceiling, utterly broken by a woman he had assumed was nothing more than a boring, gullible drone. I lowered the microphone. I had delivered the audit. I had laid out the evidence. The trap was sprung. The cage was locked, and the predators were exposed to the harsh light of justice. I looked toward the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom, waiting for the final act of this meticulously planned takedown to begin. The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open. They burst apart with a deafening crash that echoed over the chaotic murmurs of the stunned crowd. A sudden flood of stark white flashlights pierced the warm golden ambiance of the anniversary gala. A dozen federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with the letters FBI emblazoned across their backs poured into the grand space. They moved with a terrifying synchronized precision that immediately silenced the remaining chatter in the room. This was not a polite corporate inquiry. This was a full-scale federal raid. The lead agent, a tall woman with an uncompromising glare and a posture of absolute authority, marched straight down the center aisle. 2 armed agents flanked her, while the rest fanned out quickly to secure every exit. The wealthy investors, local politicians, and high society socialites instinctively backed away, pressing themselves against the silk-covered walls and the lavish banquet tables. The illusion of their untouchable elite world was entirely shattered by the harsh, undeniable reality of federal law enforcement. I handed the silver microphone to a bewildered waiter standing frozen near the stage steps. I smoothed the skirt of my crimson gown and took a deliberate step back, allowing the federal agents a clear path to their primary targets. The lead agent climbed the steps. She did not look at me or Jamal. Her eyes were locked entirely on Hudson, who was still sprawled on the polished wooden floor where Jamal had shoved him. Hudson scrambled backward like a cornered animal, his expensive custom tuxedo jacket bunched awkwardly around his shoulders. The charming, untouchable wealth manager was gone, replaced by a pathetic, terrified criminal, Hudson Pierce. The lead agent announced, her voice carrying a sharp metallic authority that required absolutely no amplification. You are under federal arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, and money laundering. Two agents hauled Hudson to his feet without an ounce of gentleness. They spun him around violently and slammed his hands behind his back. The sharp click of the heavy metal handcuffs snapping closed around his wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. It was the absolute sound of my freedom. Hudson struggled against their iron grip. His face flushed a dark mottled red, his arrogant facade completely dissolving into panic. "Claire," he screamed, twisting his neck wildly to look at me. "You cannot do this to me. I am your husband. We can fix this. Tell them it is a massive misunderstanding." I did not blink. I looked down at the man who had planned to drug me, steal my child, and stage my tragic suicide for financial gain. "There are no misunderstandings here, Hudson," I replied coldly. "Only a forensic audit executed with absolute perfection. Enjoy federal prison." While Hudson was being read his rights, another team of agents moved aggressively toward the front row. My mother, Catherine, was still clutching the edge of her table. She looked utterly deranged. Her perfect hair disheveled, her expensive designer makeup smudged from her earlier panic. My father, William, stood frozen beside her, looking like a hollow, fragile shell of the arrogant patriarch he had been just an hour ago. William and Catherine, a federal agent, stated, stepping directly into their personal space. "We are serving you with immediate federal subpoenas regarding your direct financial involvement in Apex Pinnacle Ventures. Every bank account, investment portfolio, and real estate holding associated with your names has been legally frozen pending a full federal investigation into racketeering and conspiracy. We will be seizing your digital devices right now." My mother let out a shrill, piercing scream. She lunged forward desperately, grabbing the federal agent by the forearm. "You cannot do this," Catherine wailed, completely abandoning all pretense of upper-class dignity. "We are victims here. Hudson tricked us. We had no idea the money was stolen. We are prominent members of this community." The agent effortlessly detached my mother's grasping hands. "You can explain that to the federal prosecutor, ma'am. Hand over your phones immediately, or you will be placed under arrest for obstruction of justice." My father silently reached into his tuxedo pocket and handed over his phone. His hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the device. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy. I stared right back at him, my expression completely blank. I offered him the exact same cold indifference he had offered me my entire life. On the other side of the stage, Stella was frantically trying to crawl away from the blinding spotlight. She had backed herself into a massive floral arrangement, weeping hysterically. She tried to play her ultimate trump card, the role of the helpless, innocent victim. "I did not know anything," Stella sobbed, holding her hands up defensively as an agent approached her. "Hudson told me he was a brilliant investor. I just signed the papers he gave me. I am just a mother. Please, you have to believe me." Jamal stepped forward. He pulled his official badge from his pocket and presented it to the lead FBI agent. The agent nodded respectfully, acknowledging Jamal's critical role in coordinating the stealth operation. The high society guests watching the exchange were visibly stunned. The man my parents had constantly belittled and mocked as a diversity hire was currently commanding a federal strike force inside their own anniversary gala. Stella looked up at Jamal, her tear-streaked face lighting up with a sudden, desperate hope. "Jamal, baby, please," Stella cried out, reaching for his pant leg. "Tell them I am innocent. Tell them I am a good person. You know I would never commit a crime. Please help me." Jamal looked down at the woman he had loved, the woman who had brought another man's child into his home and lied to his face every single day. His expression was a terrifying mask of absolute composure. He did not show anger. He did not show sorrow. He showed nothing but the cold, calculating detachment of a prosecutor observing a guilty suspect. "You will need to contact a defense attorney," Stella Jamal said, his voice flat and unyielding. "And I highly suggest you find a public defender. Your personal accounts were frozen by the SEC 20 minutes ago. You do not have a single dollar left to your name." Stella let out a guttural, agonizing shriek as an agent confiscated her designer purse and her diamond-encrusted phone. Her cries echoed off the vaulted ceilings, blending with Hudson's frantic shouting as the agents forcefully marched him down the center aisle. The guests parted again, pressing themselves against the walls to avoid touching the disgraced wealth manager. The grand ballroom, which had been meticulously designed to celebrate my family's wealth and superiority, was now an active federal crime scene. Waiters stood frozen with trays of champagne. Wealthy investors frantically texted their lawyers. The illusion of the perfect family was entirely obliterated, replaced by the ugly, undeniable truth of their massive greed. I stood on the stage, the vibrant red fabric of my gown contrasting sharply with the dark uniforms of the federal agents swarming around me. I had survived their emotional abuse, their financial manipulation, and their literal plot to end my life. I had turned their own arrogance into their ultimate downfall. But the night was not quite over yet. Jamal still had one final piece of business to conduct, a personal execution that required no federal badge. Jamal turned away from the federal agents and walked back toward the center of the stage. The chaotic noise of the ballroom seemed to completely fade away as he approached Stella. She was still kneeling on the carpet, looking up at him with mascara running down her cheeks. She was desperately waiting for the man she had manipulated for 5 years to offer her a shred of sympathy. Jamal did not offer sympathy. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his midnight blue tuxedo and pulled out a thick, crisp, white envelope. He held it out to her. Stella looked at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake, refusing to take it. Jamal simply let it drop. The heavy envelope landed squarely on her lap. "Those are your official divorce papers," Jamal said. His voice was entirely conversational, yet it carried an absolute, devastating finality. "You will also find an emergency ex parte order signed by a family court judge this afternoon. It grants me sole physical and legal custody of my oldest child, the only child in our household who actually shares my DNA." Stella gasped, clutching her chest. "Jamal, please, you cannot take my son away from me. I am his mother." "You are an unfit, unemployed federal suspect facing indictment," Jamal corrected her sharply. "Furthermore, the second document in that envelope is a certified laboratory report. It is a legally binding paternity test, proving that your youngest son, the baby I woke up to feed every single night for 2 years, belongs to the felon who was just dragged out of this room in handcuffs. You paraded that child around my family. You smiled in my face while making a fool out of me. You get nothing, Stella. You do not get my son, you do not get my assets, and you will not get a single dime of alimony." Stella let out a harrowing wail and buried her face in the carpet. Jamal stepped right over her and turned his attention to my father. William had collapsed into a chair at the front table, gripping his chest as he struggled to breathe. "William," Jamal said, his tone dripping with the professional authority of a seasoned prosecutor. "For 5 years you treated me like a street thug who got lucky. You mocked my public sector salary and my background. But because of my background, I know how the law actually works. I filed a motion to inform your primary bank that the collateral you used to secure your massive investment in this firm is now tied directly to a federal racketeering investigation." My father looked up, his eyes widening in pure horror. "Your bank is triggering the default clause on your estate," Jamal finished smoothly. "They will be seizing your mansion by Monday morning. You and Catherine are entirely homeless. Enjoy your anniversary. You built a kingdom on arrogance and deceit, but tonight you get to watch it burn completely to the ground forever." The sheer magnitude of the destruction hit my parents all at once. The flawless facade was completely gone. The generational wealth was gone. The golden child was exposed as a fraud and an adulterer, and the perfect son-in-law was a handcuffed federal criminal. My father gripped the edge of the banquet table, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He looked exactly like a man who had just stepped off a massive cliff and was finally realizing that gravity applies to absolutely everyone, even the country club elite. My mother, Catherine, had always operated with icy, untouchable composure. She had spent my entire life looking down her aristocratic nose at me, treating me like a frustrating stain on her otherwise perfect legacy. But watching Jamal deliver the final crushing legal blow to her husband and her favorite daughter broke something fundamental inside her mind. The proud matriarch of the family completely crumbled in front of the very audience she had spent decades trying to desperately impress. Catherine dropped heavily to her knees right there in the middle of the ballroom floor. The expensive silk fabric of her designer gown pooled awkwardly around her on the hotel carpet, but she did not even care. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, crawling frantically toward the edge of the stage where I stood. "Claire, please!" Catherine wailed, her voice cracking with pure, unfiltered desperation. Her perfectly styled hair was now messy, clinging to her wet, mascara-stained cheeks. She reached out her manicured hands, grasping wildly at the air just inches from the hem of my crimson dress. "You have to fix this right now. We are family. We are your flesh and blood. You cannot do this to us." I looked down at her. I did not move away, but I certainly did not reach out to help her up either. I just watched her perform the most pathetic, transparent act of manipulation I had ever witnessed. "You have to tell them. We did not know where the money came from," Catherine sobbed, her voice echoing painfully through the quiet, stunned ballroom. "Tell the federal agents that Hudson lied to us. Tell them we are innocent investors. You can trace the accounts, Claire. You have the power to protect us from this. You cannot let them take our beautiful home. You cannot let them put your own parents in federal prison. You have to save us." She looked up at me with wild, begging eyes. For the first time in 34 years, she was looking at me as if I held absolute value. But she was not looking at a daughter. She was looking at a lifeline. She wanted me to use my professional expertise to construct a massive lie that would save her from the consequences of her own blinding greed. My father finally found his voice, a pathetic, broken croak from the table behind her. "Claire, sweetheart, please. We made a terrible mistake. We trusted the wrong man. You have to help us navigate this crisis. We will do anything you ask. Just do not let them take everything." They were begging me to shield them from the fire they had actively helped set, expecting me to sacrifice my integrity one last time to keep them warm. I stood at the edge of the stage, looking down at the people who had tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward to steal my life. My expression was perfectly blank. I felt no pity. I felt no obligation. The emotional tethers that had bound me to this toxic family for 34 years had finally snapped, leaving behind nothing but cold, hardened steel. "Family," I said. My voice was dangerously soft, yet it sliced through the heavy silence of the ballroom with lethal precision. "You want to talk about family right now?" My mother nodded frantically from the floor, her tear-streaked face looking up at me with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Yes, Claire. We are family. We have to stick together. You have to tell the federal agents that we were tricked. You can fix the financial records. Please, you must save us." "This family died the night I turned on the baby monitor," I replied, my tone dropping to a chilling monotone. "You did not make a mistake, Catherine. You made a calculated decision to destroy me. You and William actively financed a federal crime because you wanted a 30% return on your investment. You paid a corrupt doctor to falsely document a mental breakdown so you could rip my son from my arms and lock me away forever. You dug this grave with your own blinding greed. Now you get to lie in it." I took a step back from the edge of the stage, breaking the physical proximity she was desperately trying to maintain. The disgust I felt was absolute. "I will not protect you," I declared, ensuring every federal agent and every high society guest in the room heard my final verdict. I have handed every piece of evidence, every wire transfer, and every recorded conversation directly to the federal authorities. Enjoy the absolute consequences of your actions. Good luck with the bankruptcy. My mother let out a guttural, agonizing scream, collapsing entirely onto the carpet. She clutched her head, her wails echoing against the vaulted ceiling. My father buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the realization that their ruin was absolute and irreversible. The empire of lies they had built to impress their wealthy friends had completely collapsed into a pile of federal indictments. I turned away from them without a single ounce of regret. I handed the silver microphone to a stunned waiter who was still frozen near the stage steps. I walked over to Jamal. We did not need to exchange any words. The pact we had forged in that rundown diner had been executed flawlessly. We had delivered the audit, served the legal papers, and burned their false kingdom to ashes. I linked my arm through Jamal's and we walked down the center aisle together. The crowd parted for us in absolute silence. The wealthy investors, the local politicians, and the country club elite pressed themselves against the banquet tables, their eyes wide with shock and morbid fascination. The grand ballroom, which had been meticulously designed to celebrate my family's superiority, was now a federal crime scene, echoing with the sounds of my mother's weeping and Stella's hysterical sobs. Hudson was already being dragged out a side door by the federal agents, his head hung low in ultimate defeat. We pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out of the ballroom. The frantic screaming and crying faded behind us, sealed away in the wreckage of their own making. We walked down the sweeping marble staircase and across the grand foyer, leaving the glittering illusion of the hotel behind us forever. We stepped out into the cool, crisp night air of the city. The contrast was immediate and profound. The suffocating tension of the gala was replaced by the clean, biting chill of reality. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of true freedom. The heavy burden I had carried for 3 decades was finally gone. Jamal turned to me near the valet stand. The exhaustion that had shadowed his eyes for weeks was finally gone. He looked like a man who had reclaimed his life and his dignity. "You did good," Claire Jamal said quietly. His voice carried a deep, resonant respect that I had never received from my own blood relatives. "We both did," I replied, offering him a genuine smile. "Take care of your son, Jamal." He gave me a slight, respectful nod before walking toward his parked vehicle to go pick up his child. He was walking toward a future free from Stella's manipulation and my parents' elitist disdain. He was walking toward peace. I turned and walked toward my own waiting town car. The driver opened the door, and I slid into the comfortable leather seat. I instructed him to take me to a new, undisclosed address in a quiet, secure neighborhood miles away from the wreckage of my past. As the town car pulled away from the hotel, I leaned back and watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. I pulled out the prepaid burner phone and deactivated it, tossing it into my purse. The forensic accountant who had dismantled a massive money laundering syndicate was clocking out. The woman who had survived a lifetime of emotional abuse was finally going home. The drive was peaceful and quiet. When the car finally pulled into the driveway of my new house, the night was just beginning to give way to dawn. The house was modest, warm, and entirely secure. It was a space I had purchased quietly, through a blind trust completely untainted by Hudson's stolen money or my family's toxic influence. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled of fresh paint and lavender. I walked down the hall and quietly opened the door to the nursery. My trusted nanny, who had stayed through the night, offered a warm smile and slipped out of the room to give me privacy. I walked over to the crib and looked down at my 1-year-old son. Leo was sleeping soundly, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, comforting rhythm. He was safe. He would never know the sting of my mother's conditional love. He would never learn the ruthless arrogance of his father. He would grow up in a home filled with genuine warmth, raised by a mother who knew exactly how to fight for him. I reached down and gently stroked his soft cheek. A profound, untouchable peace settled over my entire being. I had shed the immense weight of their toxicity. I had faced the absolute darkest corners of their greed and emerged victorious. The shadows were gone, replaced by the bright, unyielding sunlight of my new reality. My life was finally entirely my own. If you have ever found the courage to completely dismantle a toxic environment and rebuild your life on your own terms, let me know your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding the strength to walk away and build a beautiful life from the ashes. The chilling narrative of Claire's survival serves as a powerful testament to one profound lesson: true strength does not lie in enduring toxic loyalty, but in the courage to walk away and reclaim your own narrative. Society often conditions us to believe that family bonds are unbreakable and that we must sacrifice our own well-being to maintain the illusion of harmony. We are taught to forgive endlessly, to shrink ourselves to fit into the molds created by those who share our blood. However, as this story vividly illustrates, blood relation does not automatically guarantee love, respect, or safety. Claire's journey demonstrates that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones sitting at our own dinner tables. Her parents and husband exploited her sense of duty, weaponizing her very sanity for their own greedy ambitions. Yet her ultimate victory was not merely the financial or legal ruin of her betrayers. It was her profound internal shift. She realized that her worth was not dictated by a mother who saw her as a disposable asset, or a husband who viewed her as a financial shield. By meticulously dismantling their criminal empire without shedding a single tear of surrender, she proved that setting ironclad boundaries is the ultimate act of self-preservation. Healing begins the exact moment we stop seeking validation from those who are committed to misunderstanding us. When we sever the ties of toxic obligation, we create the necessary space to build a sanctuary of genuine peace and authentic connection. It takes immense bravery to stand alone in the ashes of a burned-down life, but from those ashes, we can forge a future entirely our own. If you found yourself inspired by this journey of reclaiming power, please share this reflection with someone who needs to hear it today.